meeting with publicly undecided members of the Senate, Republicans, to discuss with them the issue of the right to marry and why I think that they ought to be supportive of the right to marry. I have found in the discussions folks to be very open-minded. They recognize it as a serious issue that they're taking quite seriously. And the point I've tried to make to them is I think it is very much consistent with both Republican interests and also Republican principles. From an interest perspective, if you look at polling, which many of you have reported on, it's fairly clear there's been a big change in how voters think about this issue, particularly here in New York. Consistently, a majority of voters, including independents, including ticket splitters, and including many Republicans, being supportive of the right to marry, the freedom to marry. In terms of Republican values and principles, if you think about it, a party that stands for freedom, a party that wants to promote more families and family values, and a party that tries to live by the golden rule, it seems to me, for all those reasons, ought to be supportive of this issue. So if folks have one or two questions, I'd be happy to answer, but thank you for time and appreciate it.
Who did you meet with? I'm Ken Levin of the Daily News. I had a story today, one of the undecideds, Greg Ball, raising the religious exemption, and not just whether clergy have to marry under the bill, which they wouldn't, but the questions about whether churches would have to decide whether to offer adoption services or get rid of them because of anti-discrimination exemptions not being included.
Well, some people have raised issues regarding religious exemptions, and I think if you look, there's a couple issues. First, there are existing laws on the New York books, SAMHSA and others, which have a very clear religious exemption, which it's my understanding would apply to a situation like the one you're asking. Second, on this separate question, which is a separate question of marriage, there is, under the proposal that's being considered, a similar clear exemption. So the same way that there were some who worried that SAMHSA would have an effect of forcing religious organizations to do something, and it didn't, the same thing will happen with respect to marriage, where there's a clear exemption which will prevent people from being forced to do things they don't want to do. This is, remember, civil marriage we're talking about.
What senators have you met with?
I'm not going to tell you that.
How many?
I'm meeting with a lot of the folks who publicly have said that they are still thinking about the issue. I'm finding the discussions to be thoughtful and interesting, but look, you all have reported a lot on who some of those might or might not be.
What questions are they asking you?
I think folks are being pretty thoughtful. They're hearing what I have to say, and I think, again, people are listening and thinking about, hopefully, the points I'm making, which is, you know, former Vice President Cheney said it, freedom means freedom for everybody. And they're thinking, you know what, I want to encourage more families. One of the greatest accomplishments I think that Republicans have made over the years have been laws like, for example, welfare reform that strengthen and promote families. Letting two adults who love each other get married strengthens and promotes families.
Yeah, but what questions have the senators been asking you? I didn't hear an answer to that. What questions
apologies.
have they been asking?
What they asked me is my viewpoint on the issue, and I described my viewpoint on the issue.
What have they said? Have you talked about the Conservative Party endorsement in relation to this issue? Have you talked about that with them, and what have you said about it?
I've not discussed that particular issue. That has not come up in at least a couple of meetings I've done so far, but obviously that's an important issue and something that I think is not something I've addressed.
Do you think the Offensive Marriage Act should be repealed?
I do, but that's obviously this meeting today is about the New York issue.
Did you meet with Senator Skelos? Has he given you any indication that it would actually come to the floor at all before they end their session?
Senator Skelos has said publicly, and that's what, whenever I've had any discussions, I've heard that it's an issue that people ought to be able to vote their conscience on. I think it's an issue he's taking seriously, and that's the right way that in my opinion, for people to take the issue.
Did he give you an indication it's actually going to come to a vote?
We did not get into that discussion.
The governor said he's not going to introduce a bill unless he's sure the votes are available. Is that a strategy you agree
with? There are experts around me that know a lot more than I do. I'm speaking as a New York resident who also has a long history in Republican politics and who personally cares about this issue. So a tactical question like that is better left to experts.
But do you think there should be an up or down vote?
Again, I leave that to experts to make that decision. I'm hopeful and confident from the discussions I've had and others have had that there will be an up or down vote and that the vote will be positive because, again, I think that as people look at this issue, they recognize it is consistent with what their constituents want, most importantly, and secondly, it's consistent with the values that they espouse and certainly that many Republicans stand for, the values being freedom, the values being promoting strong families, and the values being following what the Golden Rule would say.
You mentioned the possibility of political donations for Republicans.
I have not and would not.
We'll take one more. Anybody?
What's the one thing you would tell them why they should vote for it?
The one thing I would say as to why folks should vote for it is that it's consistent with what your constituents want, and a party, our party, the Republican Party, that wants to promote freedom, that wants to promote strong families, and that believes we should live by the golden rule ought to allow two adults who love one another to be married.